So we're ready to get started then. Okay, so I'm going to talk today about hacking our ability to communicate. Let me give you a brief introduction of me. I'm Janet Callahan. I'm actually a mechanical engineer. I do a lot of crazy stuff with brake tubes and hoses, which sounds really boring and sometimes is. I'm also a writer on the side, and I'm the mother of 2 very complicated children, which is part of how I got here. I am not, just for the record, a doctor, nurse, occupational therapist, speech pathologist, or any of those sorts of things, but we've seen enough of them these days that I scare them. So let's talk a little bit about language. Language is a pretty complex thing, and communication is a pretty complex thing. Most of us do it without really thinking about it. We open our mouths and words come out, sometimes not even the words we really thought we were going to say. We don't stop and think about how we're going to form those words or what muscles we have to use or when to breathe or what to do. It just works. For most of us, when we're sick, even if you lose your voice, you can type or you can write on a piece of paper. And again, most of that just works, even if you have to figure out how to spell it, that's one thing, but it's not a matter of thinking through every little motion to make it happen. But when those things don't work, then we have problems. And we live that at our house every day. Language development happens without us doing anything in most cases. You don't tell a kid how to talk. You don't send them to speech therapy unless there's a problem, because every kid learns this on their own and figures it out. Most kids say their first words around 1 year old. Most 1-year-olds can learn simple sign language. By the time a child is 18 months old, most have between 5 and 40 words. For the record, my son is going to be 5 in June. He has 5 words. Most 2-year-olds can say 2-word combos: want more, want milk, mommy up. Most kids between 2 and 3 have 200 words in their vocabulary. And by 3, most kids get the concept of grammar and context and syntax. They get past, present, and future. They don't always get it right, but they get the idea that things happened yesterday and they will happen tomorrow. And by age 6, language is pretty much there. There are a few subtleties, the things you learn in English class about gerunds and prepositions and all those things aren't really set by that point. But most 6-year-olds, you can carry on a reasonable conversation with them. And that all happens pretty much automatically just by being immersed in language around them. To do this sort of thing, you have to be able to have a working memory. You have to be able to do what they call motor planning, which is the sequence of things where how your muscles move to make something happen. Again, this is something that happens for most of us naturally and just straight out of the box. That's how it works. It takes over 70 muscles to speak: your jaw, your tongue, your ability to control your breathing, swallowing, and all those things. You have to be able to coordinate all of those muscles in the right order. And you have to be able to hear what other people are saying so that you can repeat what they're doing and mimic them. If this breaks down, it breaks it down in a couple of ways. If there are issues with what you're hearing, then it's hard to mimic the sounds that are coming in if what you're hearing isn't what's actually being said. In a lot of cases, they use sign language because it's relatively easy. It's always there. You can take it anywhere. It's not really all that practical in public because how often do you really run into someone who knows a lot of sign language? Not that often. Although I have to say that the more we sign, the more people we run into who do sign. There are also technological devices like hearing aids and cochlear implants that are being used now for children with hearing issues and even adults with hearing issues. But again, that still then has to be relearned. You have to learn to interpret the sounds coming in and mimic the sounds with what you're putting out. So there's still a lag there, even if you implant a child with a cochlear implant very young. They still have to learn all those language things. If you have motor planning or coordination issues, then you start having issues producing specific sounds, or even most sounds. It means that sometimes you can say a word and sometimes you can't, because you have to get it all lined up in your head, how to make that word go. And if you can't get it all in the right order the next time, then the word doesn't come out that way. You also have to have, if you have memory issues, it makes it hard to grasp from one time to the next what a word means or how a word is said or how it's pronounced. In some adults with strokes and other traumatic injuries, they know the word they want to say, but they can't tell you what it is, or they could pick the right picture but can't tell you the right word. So I'm going to go back to the motor planning and coordination type issues, because that's really what I'm most familiar with. When you have motor planning issues that make it difficult to speak, it makes sign language difficult too. Sign language takes a lot of fine motor skills. It takes being able to move all of your fingers independently and being able to move fingers and hands and arms in motions. In a lot of cases, kids like this understand every word, but they can't say anything. And that leads to some interesting interactions with people, because we judge each other based on our speech. You know, when you hear someone who has not very much education, that you're not going to hear the same sorts of speech from them that you hear from somebody with a college degree. And the same thing happens even with children. Older kids who can write or can type, then it works out okay, at least in environments where that's feasible. But to stand up here and type everything you're going to say is a really slow process. There are now a lot of tools in what they call alternative and augmentative communication and assistive technology, which is a really long word for we use computers to do the things we can't do ourselves. I think, let's see if this loads reasonably quickly. Stephen Hawking's voice, such as it is pretty well known. And he uses the same sorts of systems that they're using now with small children with speech difficulties. So when you talk about assistive technology, you can have electronic things and you can have non-electronic things. Stephen Hawking obviously has electronic things. We all know that that electronic sounding voice is there. It's my understanding that the company that makes that system for him has actually taken that voice out of their rotation so that nobody else can use it. When you talk about non-electronic things, you get things like this. You get a big book. It has lots of little cards. If you're familiar with small children, you know that these are going to go flying across the room more often than you would like to think, and you lose them, and so on and so forth. It's actually a trademarked, copywritten system for introducing communication with children that starts at a very simple level of, you give me the card, I give you the thing on the card. And they work their way up to building whole sentences out of it. And it works really great for a lot of kids. But it's kind of cumbersome. We don't have that many words, and we still have this big book. You can also write or just with a paper and pen. But again, if your 4 or 5-year-old can't spell yet, that's not very useful. When you start talking about electronic things, there are a lot more options. These used to cost upwards of $10,000 to $20,000. I'm guessing the system that Stephen Hawking uses was considerably more than that when he first got it. But like everything else electronic things, people are smarter, our technology is better, the costs are coming down a little bit. Some things like the Dynavox at the top, some of the original ones were very heavy. I have a friend whose first grader carries around a 20-pound communication device. Her kid weighs 60 pounds. Carrying it is kind of generous for what they do. These have lots of options, though. They can use eye gaze, where it can track your eyes to know which word you want to say. Stephen Hawking's system is actually switched. It means that the computer goes at a slow speed from one word to the next, or one column to the next, and you hit the switch when it's on the right column. And then it goes down the column until it finds the right word in that column, and you hit the switch again. It works really well for folks who don't have a lot of motor control, or who only have limited motion in their extremities. And then they also can use just fingers or noses or toes or whatever. These image-based electronics ones are becoming a lot more common and more popular, because some of them are even available on like an iPad. My son's new one is based on a Samsung tablet. It's off-the-shelf hardware. It's easy to get, it's easy to fix, and it makes the cost much more reasonable. There are even apps out there that you can download, some of them even for free, that will turn your cell phone or your iPad into a device like this. The apps are, of course, of varying quality, because it depends on who developed them. Some of them were developed by parents who couldn't find what they needed for their kid, and some of them were developed by speech pathologists and experts in the field trying to get the best that they could for what they wanted, how they thought it worked. These are even being used for adults who have had strokes and other brain injuries, especially things that people can get for very inexpensive cost. If you already have a cell phone, that doesn't add any cost, really, to add an app onto it to be able to communicate. Plus, because of the electronic nature of some of these, you can tear apart your kids' toys and turn them into speech devices too. You can put doorbells on the refrigerator that say, "I want a drink," when you hit the doorbell. Or you can put like one-sentence communication tabs every place you go. It's a long, drawn-out way to do it, but it can be done. And it saves time and effort for everybody when it's a frequent request that you're doing that way. Some of these tablet and phone-based systems are really inexpensive. You can modify them on the fly. This one, for example, has a camera. So if we go someplace new and Alex needs a new word, we take a picture of whatever it was and plug it right into the system, which makes it very convenient for us, rather than having to send it out to be reprogrammed every time we have to change something. The downside, of course, is insurance frowns on things that are not medical devices. So some of the companies are getting a little smarter. The guys that make this one have a locked down version that insurance will pay for. And they have a aftermarket fee that you can pay to have it unlocked so that you can add other apps to it, because clearly it's a fully functional tablet. And if there are other things that you need it to do, there's no reason to carry around two devices. There are lots of reviews out there for apps online. A lot of autism sites run their own review sections for apps like this. And that went way faster than I was expecting. So I guess in summary, communication is really complex, and so is speech. And when speech doesn't work, we have to find some other thing to do. And there are a lot of options out there, from the very low tech to the very high tech. But we may all be carrying around our cell phones to do this for us eventually. So it's nice to know that those kinds of things are out there. Any questions? Yes.
when did you start having your kids use some of these more complicated devices to learn to communicate? How old were they?
Alex was about 3.5 or 4, but Alex was kind of complicated because he was afraid of toys that made noise. And there was a point where we were convinced that we could not do a device like this with him because he was so afraid of things that made noise when you push the button that we were convinced it wouldn't work. That has sort of resolved itself at this point, and we're kind of working that direction now. In the meantime, we've been using sign language with him, and although it's difficult for others to understand him, people who are around him a lot get most of what he signs. So it's a trade-off. With my younger one, Bethany, we're talking about trialing some things this summer, some short 1 or 2 choice type things. This is what Alex's device has on it right now. They give us the editing software so that we can edit more in depth on the computer at our leisure and then download to the device. His school is very big on what they call core vocabulary, which is things that aren't nouns, in short. It's the words that are most commonly used so that you can get the most out of the words that you have available. One of our problems with this with Alex is because we've been using sign language for a while, we don't accept him signing want anymore. He has to tell us what he wants, right? You have to go beyond the first word. Okay, now what? You want a ball, you want something to eat, you want... And in fact, we're pushing now even further than that. You want a ball, okay, which ball? The green one, the orange one, the pink one. So this has been a real struggle to get him to use this page because this page has no details. And he knows that if he signs it, he'll get it way faster. Their built-in vocabulary, though, is actually really slick because you can say, I want, and it predicts what you're going to say next. Like, I want to go to school or the bank or the library or whatever. They do everything by categories, so there are fun places and regular places. There are lots of pages for things because kids are all about things and because things are useful to us. They're the things we talk about. And it's been interesting to see their standard vocabulary versus the things we would use at home. Their hygiene page didn't have anything about going to the bathroom, which for a preschooler is kind of a big deal, right? Their medical page had hurts and Band-Aids and blood and cotton balls. And we had to add stethoscopes and breathing treatments and inhalers because those are things we see every day. So it's been interesting to kind of look at what they think most people talk about versus the kinds of things we actually use. We're really hopeful that as time goes on, this will get to be a lot more useful for him. We've only had this device 2 or 3 months. And he's still in that phase of pushing every button. Every button, every button. But that's okay because when we learn to speak, we babble a lot too. Little kids make lots and lots of noises and they say words that don't sound like words, and we have to get through that phase of this too. He likes playing ball, for example, so we put a whole page of things to do with ball. You want to bounce the ball, throw the ball, roll the ball, whatever. The other interesting thing about these electronic ones is that they all have voices. The voices are much better now, and I say better in terms of they sound more like actual people than, say, Stephen Hawking's system does. Alex's is set up to sound like a little boy, and we're still a little iffy about the pronunciations it uses on some things. But it's not bad. It's not my voice, which our last device was. Our last device, every square on there I had to record. 32 squares times 5 levels. And it was sometimes a little strange for him to ask for something and to hear my voice coming out of the machine. But we've also had some of the apps and some of the free apps and some of the sort of low-cost apps. We knew we were eventually going to work out something with school to get to a device that was going to work for him. But we also still have books full of PEX cards too. I mean, everything, we're kind of throwing the kitchen sink at him right now, and so we have kind of the whole range at our house. Other questions? Back in the back.
You have all of these pieces that have pictures on them. Do they eventually grow out of the pictures where they can do more and more with reading so that there is more learning of what the word is without the picture? Is that something that comes after?
That's what they hope for. The expectation is that older kids with more skills will have things without pictures. Some of the pictures in the one slide, some of the devices in the slide actually have no pictures at all on them. Some of these ones down here in the bottom. And those ones in the bottom are this same one that Alex has. It's just a different vocabulary. They can put even keyboards on them, and it can, once you type the word, then pronounce the word. So it can be done either way. There are some other systems out there that use a symbolic system that's very, very compact. That's not an actual picture of the thing, and it's not just a word. And I've seen videos of people that use those that can use them very well and very quickly. That are people who would never type that fast. So it kind of goes both ways.
Do you foresee your kids getting to middle school and just getting an iPhone and like using the swipe feature and just texting you from across the house all the time?
Probably.
Yeah.
One of the parents that I know has a 12-year-old, and as we're working our way through this, it's nice to have people who've been there and done that kind of thing. His daughter texts a lot, and this year actually she got rid of her fancy expensive device and just carries an iPad. Her argument was that this makes her stand out as weird, and she is very conscious of how she appears to other people. But an iPad is just an iPad.
How do you know when your son wants or when your family needs a new word to put on the board?
It kind of depends. If it's something we're using a lot, then clearly we need to figure out what to do with it. If it's something with Alex, it's hard to know sometimes because he does have some delays. And his signing vocabulary is somewhere between 130 and 150 words right now. So that's not really that many words in the grand scheme of things. So when we run into things like, a couple weeks ago we learned the word key. We learned the sign for key. We haven't put it on here yet because the situation where it came up was in speech therapy. She wanted him to stop playing with the ball, so she put it in the cabinet and locked the cabinet. And he's like, no, ball, please. So we said, okay, fine. We taught him the sign for key. We taught him how to use a key. We taught him to ask for a key. And now he can do that. In fact, up here in the hotel, I said, oh, we need the key. And he signed key, and I handed him the card, and he looked at me like I was crazy. Because clearly this little card is not a key. He has the concept. What's challenging is to be ahead of him a little bit. Because you have to figure out what he's going to want to say, not just what you know he can say. So we're talking about things like holidays. Like, what holidays does he know? What holidays does he not know? What holidays are they going to do in school that are going to be useful for them to talk about so that he can say something about them when they do them. It's always a work in progress. And for the friends of mine that are much older and farther along this, they said, yeah, it's still a work in progress. You know, we learn new words, and it's not I have to figure out what to do with it. We just remember the word and we go on. And this is, you have to figure out, is it going to be used enough to make it worth putting it in here for him to be able to recall it? They talk a lot about vocabulary selection, because clearly you're never going to have every word in the English language. It's just not possible. So do you put in Columbus Day, or do you put in big ships and discovery and America and those sorts of words to talk about Columbus Day? And that's the balance you have to strike. And right now, what we're doing is we're adding things that we use a lot. Things like, which movie do you want? Or I'm all done with this movie. Or which food do you want or not want? Those sorts of, I mean, they're very basic things at this age and at this stage of things, but the intent is to get to that point where we can have those sort of bigger picture school things going on and life things going on.
So I know you were talking about baby sign and stuff like that, and that happens around 6 months to a year. Have any of these devices with the pictures been known to help language development in quote-unquote normal developing kids?
So I don't know if there are any studies on these on normal developing kids. I know there are sign language studies that say that it improves language development for signing with very small children, which was part of why we started signing with them before this ever came up. What they are telling us is that any communication is better than no communication, and that having an option like this gives them the ability to learn language even if they can't speak. The other thing they have said is that it is apparently becoming clear to the general speech pathology community that electronic voices are easier to mimic. They are very consistent. Every time they make an A sound, it's the same sound, and it doesn't matter what word it's in. But when we talk, every A is a little different, and it's different for every person here. So they're saying the feedback we're hearing is that kids with devices like this actually, it improves their ability to speak because they have something very easy to mimic, and because they start to view these devices as their voice. So now they have this self-image of, I said that. So now they start to think, oh, I could say that with my mouth instead of with the device. So it's interesting. We're still kind of getting into that aspect of it and understanding what that means, but that's what they're telling us right now.
So by the same token, have you found that as he's started to learn using these devices, does it improve his comprehension of what you're saying? Or has that always kind of been a constant and it's just learning how he can express himself?
So I don't know. For Alex, I think it's different than it is for some kids. Our suspicion right now is that on top of some of the medical things, Alex has some difficulties processing what he hears. His hearing is okay, but somewhere between his ears and his brain, it doesn't always work out quite right. So in that respect, when we use a device or when we sign, because there's visual feedback, he sees which button you've pushed. He sees that you've pushed the button for the ball. He sees that you've pushed the button for pants and not the button for shoes. Because there's visual feedback, that reinforces his brain while he's trying to figure out what the audio feedback was. When you tell him, put your shoes on, sometimes he'll go find his shoes and put them on, and sometimes he'll decide to take his shirt off. And our therapists all tell us this is very common, that they have dozens and dozens of kids that you tell them to put their shoes on and they come back and they've stripped naked. And it's because they know you said something, They were supposed to do something, and it was about clothing. And they look around and they think, I don't really get what thing I was supposed to do, but my shirt's here. Let's try that. So we've been telling people for a while, when we sign instructions, he follows them very well, but when we say them, it's a little sketchy. And now that we're kind of following down that pathway and getting into some therapies that are meant to work on that sort of thing, we're seeing, yeah, we're not crazy. That actually is true. It does actually help him to have that visual feedback. So when they talk about this in school, for example, their statement is, do not hold his hand and make him push the buttons. You do it. You push the buttons. You show him how to do it. We don't take little kids and move their mouths around to make them talk. We tell them how to talk by talking. And it's that same modeling that we're going to do with the device. And they talk about doing things like they put the device up on the board in the classroom, and they use it like on a smart board, so that he has his device in his hands and he sees them using it up there. Again, visual feedback of what he's hearing to get kind of the whole comprehension thing working better. Back in the back.
Do any of these devices use music or anything? Because you were saying about how the recorded sounds would be easier because they're exactly the same every time if like recorded music, so he understands like cadence and stuff to maybe help with grammar or something along the lines. Did they use any music with any of it?
I don't know of any in a device like this, but I know there is music therapy that does that same sort of thing, and that's the theory behind it. We haven't tried it yet. I've kind of read up on it a little bit and kind of poked around. We're in this phase of throw things at the wall and see what sticks. But most of those sorts of things are not covered by insurance, so there's also the aspect of how do you pay for all of these things. There are a million kinds of therapy you could send your kid to. You don't know if it's going to work or not, so how do you pick? But there are also even therapies that use a metronome. They set a metronome going, and they do the rest of their therapy work with the metronome going to get that sort of rhythm kind of how it all goes together.
It also makes me wonder then about dance, getting movement to help with cadence and stuff too. I wonder if that wouldn't help too.
It might. But in Alex's case, who knows? The movement aspects of it are a challenge for him too, so just kind of getting there is, you never know. We'll find the thing that really interests him, and then we'll be off and running. Other questions? All right, well, thank you all. I have toys up here to play with if you want to come try them out. And my computer apparently decided to take a break. But